Perfect. So for me, just from my life experience, for the goals that were important to me and for going to school, for transitioning to living independently, to finding my job at Disability Rights Iowa, all of those things were made possible because of my ability to advocate for myself. I don't foresee any of those things happening without the ability to be my own self-advocate. And really, self-advocacy isn't about, obviously having information is important and educating yourself is important, but at its core, it's about self-respect. It's about saying, as a person with a disability, I have the right to these things, to be treated with respect. I have the right to these services, to these legal protections, and I'm going to create the expectation that those rights are respected. Because, it's so easy, and I'm sure parents and young people with disabilities can speak to this. We kind of get bombarded, right, with the wrong messages. That, what we have to say isn't important, that we're not entitled to those, to all these protections and all these services, and that people who respect our rights are somehow doing us a favor, right? And I think pushing back against that is really, really important, and it's been an incredible resource for me to draw on as I move towards my goals. But, really, what makes a good self-advocate is the question. How do you equip yourself to advocate on your own behalf? And how do you use that to move towards your goals and transition from, one part of your life to another? Because, it's not all one big event, right? As Beth often has to remind me, I've still got some transitioning to do, right? I've still got some skills to learn. I still have some goals that I'm going to move towards. And so it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving. That once you learn how to speak for yourself and create that expectation, it's something you draw on again and again and again. And it's a really, really important foundation. So let me talk a little bit about the tools that I see are in my toolbox as a self-advocate. First and foremost, a big part of it is knowing the laws that are in place. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a lawyer, thank goodness. But it does mean that you need to have a general idea of the big legal protections that exist for people with disabilities, and how you can use those protections to make sure that your rights are being respected. And here in a second, we're going to talk a little bit about what some of those legal protections look like. And also, it's about the ability to choose our battles. A lot of times, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir to a degree on this, there are so many small issues and so many little events and little instances of people not treating us respectfully and not, leaving their discrimination at the door, right? That I do think you have to ration your energy a little bit and decide, here are the things that are important to me, right? And that doesn't mean you let discrimination go unrecognized, but it does mean you allow yourself, right? My example is sometimes I just want to go to a Mexican restaurant and have a quesadilla, right? And yes, the handrail might be a little bit too high, and yes, the waiter might say something a little bit inappropriate, right? But I have to allow myself to turn off once in a while and save that energy for issues that are really important and central to my life. And of course, I'm going to make mistakes as an advocate, right? I might not say something the right way. I'm sure by the end of this presentation, I might, flub a few lines, right? But that's okay. That's part of the process, and it's part of learning. And ultimately, it always keeps coming back to that sense of respect of self, and believing that you should be treated appropriately. Because unfortunately, so often young people with disabilities kind of train themselves to accept discrimination when they see it and not challenge mistreatment. And that's something that we really have to push back against throughout our whole lives. And now Beth's going to talk a little bit about building a circle of support and some of the resources that allow people to advocate for themselves.
So let me tell you a little bit about me. I am the parent of 28-year-old young men. I have to remember to not call them my boys, but they will always be my boys. 28-year-old young men with intellectual disabilities and epilepsy, which has caused some other issues. And they don't live with me. I will just tell you all, I'm very excited they have their own place and they work and live in the community. But that's a long-time goal that we've worked on for a really long time. I started my work, though, before having children as a social worker at what is now Child Serve. Back then it was Convalescent Home for Children, and we worked with some of the first kids who were coming from institutions out into the community, and that was a community living setting. So I've really been a part of this work for a really, really long time, and like Emmanuel, I'm still on a journey also, because I believe really, really strongly in self-advocacy and people being in charge of their own lives. And as a parent, that can be really hard for your typically developing children or your children who may have some additional challenges. It requires some, it requires you to be brave at times when you may not want to be brave. One of the ways that we have talked a lot about, how do we make this work, is the circle of support. If you think about it, we all have a circle of support. My daughter, who is a physician and quite capable, is just texting me, "Mom, where do I plant tomatoes?" We all have that circle of support, those people that we call on in the community that are going to help us with our daily living. And when people, when you have a disability or other challenges, I think making sure that you have a circle of support, and I'm going to say this, that doesn't always include your mom, is really, really important. My husband said to me on the way to work yesterday, "What happens if you die?" And he said, "Who's going to do all this stuff?" And I said, "Well, we need to get that figured out, don't we?" We do have things figured out. And, you know, his question was more a part of overwhelming circumstances that we're feeling right now. But you do need to think about that. We cannot be the only person in our adult children's lives. It's important to help them cultivate those other people, paid or not paid. So that's something that we worked a lot at. So we have those core members in our circle. We talk a lot about this. Do you tell everybody everything? No. You go out in your degree of who's going to help you. So you have those core members. Those could be close family members, they could be parents, they could be siblings. Then you have those people who are just those volunteers in your life, those good friends, those people who are out there. And then you may have professionals that you call on the outside. And this could look like, this can be a very formalized process for circles of support, where you have somebody who's the coordinator and all that, or it can be very informal, that it's just something that you talk about. Who's in your circle? Who's this person that you can call? Who would you call for this kind of thing? And I've watched that evolve over the years with my sons. And by the way, I talk to my sons about, is it okay to share what we've learned? And they're like, "Sure, Mom," because nobody else wants to live with their mom either. So, you know, that's why I'm sharing what I'm sharing. So developing those people and helping your student or child realize who those people are in their lives that they can also call on for assistance. We sometimes get this idea that independence means I shouldn't be asking anybody for help. And really, when you think about yourself, you know how that goes, right? It usually doesn't end well when you won't ask anyone for help. We did that for a while, and I was so excited because I hadn't had phone calls for 3 days. But what we really found out was happening were situations that were out of control. So it's learning that balance as an adult about the difference between asking help or asking for assistance and you directing that, or somebody else making those decisions for you. Just because you've asked for assistance doesn't mean you're not independent.
Beyond going on what's the definition you see behind me, The idea of the protected class, more importantly, the protections that I get as a person with disability legally, have been really, really important for my life. I think, for me, the idea of the protected class really means that our society has recognized that it always hasn't done a very good job of supporting and protecting people with disabilities. And because of that, we have access to a variety of legal protections that are meant to enable us to be full participants in society, to live independently, to work independently, and to move towards our goals. And so I'm a member of what's often called the ADA generation, right? An entire group of young people who grew up under the protections of really the landmark piece of legislation for people with disabilities, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's passed right after I was born. And what this allowed me to do is it allows me to draw on all these protections so that I can, let's say, for example, go to a job interview and not be grilled extensively about my disability, right? And I can use a paratransit system to get around. That's how I get to work every day. And that was made possible because of the Americans with Disabilities Act and its various titles. And so, it's written in a way to create this broad definition of disability that is about allowing people with disabilities to become these full participants in the society. And that was important to me as a young person because, again, getting to that message, right, that young people often hear when they're engaging in transition. High school is a difficult time. You might be getting a lot of feedback about how your goals might not be feasible, or that somehow your disability is a defining thing. And what's great about the ADA is it's a piece of legislation signed by the President of the United States saying, no, people with disabilities are important. Our society needs them to live and work in the community, and we're going to give them the tools they need in order to make that a reality. And so it's all about creating that independence and that ability to access all these really important services, and also access the same types of things we all like to enjoy, like going to the mall and hanging out with friends. And so I really can't envision my life without the Americans with Disabilities Act, because it's something I draw on again and again and again. And knowing its protections and knowing what's appropriate and what isn't is really important for young people to slowly begin to learn. And there are all kinds of challenges that transition can bring. And, it's really a learning process of learning how to go from those different points in our lives and learn to advocate for ourselves and utilize the services and the protections that we have every right to.
I think I talked just a little bit about challenges that parents face when your kids are transitioning. And I think some of these challenges come not just with our kids with disabilities, but also our kids who are typically developing. And too often we forget that. We think that it's going to be so different, but really it's not. That ability to make sure that your kids know how to make good choices, your kids' ability to function in the community, their ability to do basic things like, do they know how to do the wash? Do they know how to cook a basic meal? Do they know how to grocery shop? Those very basic things. All kids need some kind of exposure to them, even if it means that they're going to direct somebody in how to do that. So those are challenges that we face in that transition, because I think as parents we have to transition also. One of the ways that many of us start with the transition process, though, is through the IEP. The IEP is that individualized educational plan that all of our students have. In Iowa, that requires that students start doing this plan at 14. And what your plan looks like at 14 is going to look very different than your plan is going to look at the end. But you should start to be developing this plan so you know where it is that you want to go. This is my experience. We went to an IEP meeting when my sons turned 14, and I did this twice every time we did it. One had a goal for his work to be a smoke jumper. The other one had his goal for his work to be a helicopter pilot. They have fine motor delays and they can't read. And I sort of lost it at the IEP meeting because I said, what kind of a transition goal is that for them? Really? Well, it's what they said they'd like to do, and we should see how we can help them achieve their dream. I said, awesome, but let's talk a little bit more about what their dream truly is. So we started talking. They love camping and fishing and hiking and all those kinds of things. They were Boy Scouts. That's what they love to do. So then we started talking about what kind of job would support their ability to do the things that they love. That's a very different way of starting to look about their future in employment. Oh, and by the way, they take $1,500 a month in medications, and this was before the Affordable Care Act, and they'll have no health insurance because they haven't qualified for anything under a waiver. That totally changed the attitude of what we were talking about at meetings. It became essential for them to get some kind of a job that would provide health care coverage so that they could function and be able to pay for their medications. So that planning early on is really important. Now, you know, we have a little bit better transition structure that we're working in. So we're looking at those areas of living, learning, working. Keep those in your brain. There's lots of good sites that you can go out there and pull down information. What does that mean? So living, can you balance a checkbook? Or do you know someone who can help you manage money? Or do you know how to cook a basic meal? Or could you go grocery shopping? All those kinds of basic things that you need for living. Learning becomes those academic things that you're doing at school. I've started to do a lot of research into requirements for kids in general education to learn about voting, about sexual health. And you know what? Our kids in special education are covered under those very things also. And those are important parts of being members of communities to absolutely have information about those things also. So stay tuned. Then working, what is it? What is working? There's changes that are going to be coming with the way Voc Rehab is serving students. We'll talk about those in some other presentations that are here at the conference. But what are those working kinds of goals? And you need to dream big. So secondary transition, I loved this statement that was the guidance for having a quality IEP. It's not just something that's written down. It needs to be this dynamic, ongoing conversation that incorporates a variety of information and perspectives to determine the most appropriate services, supports, and activities to prepare the student to pursue further education, employment, and independent living. How many of you with typically developing children think that they need this plan too? Yeah. Yeah, this is a good blueprint framework for all kids, and particularly for kids in special education, but it becomes more deliberate as we're doing this, and it's really important. So one of those things that we talk about is living independently. These happen to be my sons, who again I say all the time, do not live with me, and they purchased a home. But that was a very deliberate process that we went through starting in high school, where we talked about the need for a job that would have benefits, that would allow them to live independently and access their medication. It then went into their application for Social Security, their use of a PASS plan, which is a program to achieve self-support, which helped them get a job, which then, and discussions with a credit union to talk about how could we build credit for them, because so many young adults don't have credit. How can we develop good credit? It was a whole very deliberate process as we went along to make sure that they were going to be able to achieve the things that they wanted.
One of my earliest and strongest memories in regards to transition and beginning that plan towards living independently and working independently is I was in a meeting with my mother and a variety of, educators and folks. And I remember in my plan it said, explore living independently, explore work, explore college, explore. And my mom said, no. We're changing this language. It's going to be when Emmanuel goes to college, when Emmanuel lives independently, when Emmanuel works at his job, here are the tools we're going to make sure that he has in place in order to do that. It wasn't discussed as something that was a hypothetical. It was a certainty, right? And so the way it was described as, you're living on your own, and we got to figure out how you eat, or you're going to be eating a lot of take-in pizza, right? And we're going to have to figure all these things out because it's happening and it's coming. And that sense of certainty really helped me as a young person feel like it was going to happen and not have that sense of uncertainty about my own future. And so that really gave me the confidence to go out and learn more about all these various services that exist. One of the things that really played a big role in helping me transition to college was the Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation, right? And they're an amazing program that exists for people with disabilities to assist paying for a lot of the costs that come with moving towards their work goal, right? So you go and you apply for services and you get connected and they create this employment plan for you and you work together towards it. And vocational rehabilitation is able to financially help with a variety of different parts of that goal. And for me, that took the form of helping me pay for college. It took the form of helping me pay for interview clothes and DART tokens to go to my internships and all sorts of really, really important things. Where the self-advocacy piece comes in here is just like any large, complicated system. You have to learn how to advocate for yourself, right? And ask for what you need, and sometimes ask, very forcefully, but respectfully for what you need, right? And that's part of working with any large system. And so having the ability to do that is what allowed me to get the most out of Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation and be able to go to school and do all these great things.
My sons were also involved with Voc Rehab, and they had kind of a unique experience where they called, and again, this is where parents, you need to be brave. We had looked for a long time for jobs. They graduated from a community college program for students with disabilities in 2009 in construction technology. You know what happened in 2009? The whole bottom fell out of that. So any possibility was gone for finding a job there. And so they had found some very sub-minimum employment. They were still on Social Security benefits, so it allowed them enough money that they could still live independently, which they were just desperate to not. Again, I keep saying this, we do like each other. They did not want to live with me. And so we were able to help them stay in their own space. But the Voc Rehab counselor had talked to them, and they said, call my mom, because they didn't understand what it was. Because they said, Mom, he wants us to quit our job. And I'm like, oh gosh, it took 6 months to get these jobs. But he said, we have this opportunity to do customized employment. It's something kind of new. We're going to work with the Veterans Administration. They could come, we'll pay them a stipend for the time that it takes them to learn the position. And for them, that was 7 months. And then they can be hired as an inside hire, which meant for them, they did this, they were hired at the end of that time as a federal employee. They're so proud they have a 401k. They have a 401k, they have good health insurance. They have all those things that we started talking about when they were 14 years old in their transition plan. But it required me as a parent to be brave and take a risk, because quitting that job was really, really, really hard for me to do. But it's that high expectation that Emmanuel talks about. His mom and I have never met, but we've talked about, Emmanuel and I have talked about what good friends we could be. Because I think sometimes that's what you need. You need to come to things like this and hear other parents say, this is really hard, but be brave, because it will be the best thing for your child and your child's future and their happiness.
The day that my mom and Beth joined forces is the day I'm really in trouble, so that's not an accident if they haven't met yet. One of the things I'm really passionate about is because something I had to learn, and something I'm still learning on occasion. When people discriminate against us, when they throw up barriers in our way, when they don't treat us respectfully, it makes us mad, right? And that anger is okay. That's the right response. That's not a mistake to be frustrated when that happens. But you have to learn how to take that anger and turn it into something effective and positive. Because as a young person with a disability, and a lot of my friends learning with disabilities as well, learning how to be self-advocates, oftentimes, you come across a business that's inaccessible, for example. Right? And you go in, guns blazing, yelling, rude maybe, and you undermine yourself, right? Because those folks that you're talking to are really looking for any excuse to not listen to what you have to say, right? You want to make that as hard as possible for them. And you do that by being calm and being patient and being clear about what you expect and why you expect it. And like I said, it's something I'm still learning, right? And some days I'm better at it than others. But I never want young people to confuse being a good self-advocate with yelling, right? Or treating other people with disrespect. Because if you're going to tell somebody, I expect to be treated respectfully, you can't be yelling at the same time, right? That's a real mixed message.
We've talked a lot about this, Emmanuel and I, and often when we're teaching self-advocacy skills to other people, to students, self-advocacy is really, really important. But as soon as you become a self-advocate, you're going to have to develop a thicker skin. Because, frankly, people would really like you to just be quiet. And it's an emerging skill that we need to that I think we always all have to work on. We all need to learn how to be good self-advocates for ourselves. I always tell people the thing that I think is most important to remember: don't create sympathy for the person you're complaining about. Have you ever had one of those people that they just go on and on and on about how horrible the situation is and this person is so terrible and all that? But pretty soon you're like, wow, I feel really sorry for this person you're complaining about. So don't create sympathy for the person that you're complaining about. Learn how to self-advocate in a powerful, positive way that's truly going to make change and not get you swatted at like the annoying gnat you might be. Yes.
Last year, it was my junior year of high school, and the first semester I was put into classes where it was literally, you went back to the elementary grade level, and they literally were teaching me ABC all over again. And as hard as I could fight for myself, I self-advocated and I said, I need help, I need to get out, I needed to get into some more challenging classes.
Have your rights under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that big thing, the IDEA we talk about. Your parents have that right. So through your parents, if you really disagree with what an IEP team is doing and it's not the right thing for you and they won't listen, you have rights as a student to do a couple different things. Through your parent, you can file for due process, which is a big legal word for a process that helps protect rights, or you can file state complaint. Or Iowa has a lot of things that are mediation kinds of things. You can ask for a mediator to come in and help your IEP team work through the conflict that you have. The other thing you can do is, did they put you in this class because they had done an evaluation and said this is the level you're at?
They had replaced the old transitions coordinator with a new lady who came in. And then I also had a new caseworker. And I met my caseworker before the end of the year, but I went at the beginning of the year, and I mean the first couple of weeks, like, I didn't really understand it, like what was happening. But then like by like October, I got it, and it was just like, this is wrong, this is not right. I need to change this. But I did stand up for myself, I advocated. However, they told me, oh, sorry, you're gonna have to wait until January. It's October. And I'm not the kind of kid who takes no when it comes to my personal needs for an answer. So I went home to my parents, explained the situation. After a long period of time, we finally got a meeting with the transition coordinator at Roosevelt, and we were able to get my classes changed for the following semester, but it was still another month out. So this year has been a little better, but still I get some of these teachers who ask me the most basic questions a middle schooler could understand, and teaching us the work that middle schoolers could do. And that's what still really bothers me, is that they're still treating us like we're at the bottom of the heap and at the top of the heap, when we're all just people.
So when I hear that, one of the things that you can do, and I don't know if you did this or not, you can call an IEP meeting at any time.
I was not aware of that.
I'm so glad you came to our presentation. You could call an IEP team meeting at any time, because that really should have been an IEP team decision, not just your transition coordinator. It should have been a whole IEP team thing. And so remember that. You can call an IEP team meeting, and that meeting needs to be held within a reasonable time frame, not months, not weeks. When you've requested, I would expect a meeting to be held within 10 days. In general, that's just a general guideline.
They never told me anything like that.
Aren't you glad you came to this presentation? So using that IEP process and becoming familiar with the IEP process is really important. You know that book, that procedural safeguards book they shove across the table at you, and everybody says, oh, I don't need one, I got 17 at home. Take that book and read it. Take that book and sit and discuss it with your student, especially when you're the age that you are, so that you have an understanding of what the procedural safeguards are. No, you're not interrupting. Let me walk though.
So in the adult world, I'm struggling with the lack of an IEP team, the lack of due process, the lack of all that stuff. I'm being told that the case manager and the providers will dictate the goals, and they'll give me a copy when they're done. And I'm wondering, are my expectations for collaboration and a participant on the team based on the education system that no longer exists once they're out of education?
I'm formulating my answer. So those plans that are developed are supposed to be individualized plans. When we're talking about things like the home and community-based services waiver, those are supposed to be client-directed goals, right? They're supposed to be client-directed. What you're talking about is not client-directed. Those are for the convenience of the provider.
Amen.
When you talk about it in that manner.
So is Medicaid the oversight for this? And where the hell are you going to get somebody in Medicaid that's going to help you in your plans?
I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I'm looking at Jane Hudson, who is our executive director and has been working a lot with Medicaid and the MCOs.
Disability Rights Iowa is representing people with respect to the MCOs and Medicaid issues. So if you are facing roadblocks, we can help represent you and go through a grievance process or an appeal process. But as I read the rules, it is supposed to still be a team, and that the parent and the individual adult is part of the team, and that it's client directed, and you are developing plans.
My daughter's 20, and she's just now qualified for case management. And so, you have all these options, and as a parent, as an educated parent, it's very difficult to try to figure out which one will be the best fit. But, if the case manager that you're working with isn't doing what you feel is right, you should be able to pick a different case manager. That might lead you down a different path. I don't know if anybody else has experience with different case managers, but the ones that I'm working with really are putting my daughter's needs and her goals first, in their system. And it's working.
I have a quick question going back to the IEP and transitioning, because we're working at transitioning a child, into, the higher educational setting. But I'm being told, and I'm trying to get clarification, I've been told since he's been in high school, he has to have that one social skills class every semester. But the issue is it's not that I don't feel like he needs it. It's that I feel like he's getting it in other places. We have our MHDD plan that, he gets the community, the SCL that takes him into the community, helps him get through his practices, does things like that, but we're losing out on these credits that really would help get him closer to college, because we have to take this social skills class every semester. And to me, I don't know if that's true. Do we have to take it? Can we say no? We're not taking it because it's duplicating services in other areas, especially since, at least in middle school, they were billing Medicaid for it. So why does he have to take it?
And he, I'm going to respond, Ashley. Does your student have a behavioral goal?
Yeah.
Which is why I'm sure that they're saying that he needs to take this behavioral skills class because he has a behavioral goal. You might want to look, are there other ways besides direct instruction and special education services in behavior require specially designed instruction when you have a goal? So, just a minute. So, I should disclose Ashley and I know each other. So, one thing you might talk about is, are there other ways he could receive that specially designed instruction at school? At school. And demonstrate that he's progressing in that curriculum.
But is it mandatory that he has to take the class and then lose out on other opportunities to take classes he's interested in.
Mandatory is always a big word for students when we talk about individualized educational plans. Okay?
Because he has a para the whole day. So I don't understand why. I would think that the para could, track the behavioral and not have to have him pulled out and lose on those credits.
When we're using paraprofessionals or other supports in classrooms, they cannot provide direct instruction. They can help fulfill the plan, but they can't provide the direct instruction. So the question may be for your student is, how else could he receive direct instruction in the social skills that have been identified on his goal? Is this class the only way to do that? Okay?
How old is your student? Or how old is your son or daughter?
It's a son, he's 15, a freshman. And on the honor roll, but he's getting pulled and losing these credits that he should have an opportunity to take things that would get him closer to college. Not literally something where he's making, like, he had one thing in the social skills class he refused to do. It was a poster. And he was like, I am not doing a poster. I am not 5. I'm not doing a poster. So, I'm emailing the social skills instructor saying, can he do something different? Can he do a PowerPoint? Can we do a PowerPoint? He's willing to do a PowerPoint. He does want to do a poster because it makes him feel like he's 5. And she works with us, and he was able to do that, but he's losing every semester these opportunities.
So,
To the school, if making kids stay in these classes, how does the school benefit from making them do that? Because my son, I had the same issue with my son. So what's the benefit to the school for making your kids do that?
It's money.
yeah.
Don't they get the money whether they're in the social skills class or not?
Well, it depends. School funding becomes really difficult. So it depends, first of all, what your student is, where the funding is coming from. Is it a Medicaid billed services? A paraeducator often is, for kids with challenging behaviors, is often billed to Medicaid. But let's just go back to the IEP. And I don't want to go too far down this rabbit warren here. Let's go back to the IEP. So when you have a student with an IEP, you have goals that could be academic, or you could have goals that are behavioral. When you have goals in an area, you have to receive specially designed instruction for that measurable goal. That specially designed instruction doesn't have to be a class with 5 or 6 other kids, but you have to receive specially designed instruction in that goal to show that you are making progress in the curriculum. There are standards and benchmarks for behavior also that are established. You can go on your school website, or you can go on the Department of Education's website, and you can find those standards and benchmarks for behavior also. And so you can see, you have to be able to demonstrate that you're making progress in that curriculum through the specially designed instruction that you're receiving. If you're not receiving specially designed instruction, it's not special education.
Can I just share one thing? At this point, if you're not happy with how things are going, you have the right to call an IEP meeting, and you also can invite someone to come in and advocate for your son. And I mean, if you bring the team together, I mean, to me, do what's best for your son. And the other thing is, with transition, he's 15. If he's not allowed to take any classes that are going to meet his needs for transition, they're not meeting those legal requirements either.
Especially with him being on the honor roll like that, the social skills class or whatever that he's supposed to be taking like she mentioned, they have to give you statistics or whatever they're testing. So if there's improvement, then and he's met the goal, then that should suffice, and he shouldn't need to take it anymore. So that would allow him to fill that space with another class that he wants to.
And I think this is an issue that we often see for students who are twice exceptional. We're going to move a little bit forward here.
One suggestion, just again from as somebody with a disability who's been in those discussions, whatever action you take, I would put your son's perspective at the center of it. And when you have those meetings, let him voice why it's so important to him that he doesn't have to make a poster. And that he's treated respectfully, and he's treated in an age-appropriate way, in a way that he feels comfortable with. And that's a really strong skill for him to learn how to do too, is how to make that argument and make it the center of the talk that you're having. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of, at least for parents, what might be the double-edged sword of raising a good self-advocate. And that's kind of the right to make a bad decision. Right, and the right to make some choices that parents might not always be thrilled with.
Isn't this an awesome picture? This is from my friend in Africa. And he took this picture there, Doesn't look like a really good decision to me, but it's working for him.
And here, Beth, you can speak to this.
So we're only going to just barely touch on this, and we'd be glad to talk further with you, and hope we'll eventually have something up on our website that's a more in-depth presentation. But one of those things that comes up is guardianship, conservatorship. When your student hits 18, there's that transfer of rights that happens. That's something that you need to be looking at, and we'd love to talk to you more about those alternatives to guardianships and conservatorships that can happen. If you do have someone who you believe needs a guardianship, then you can go to court, and that's a process, a legal process that happens. But this is a question that we get all the time. I'm a guardian, so therefore you cannot smoke, drink, or go with girls who do. That's a really old saying. So this is not true. We need to learn, if you're going to be the guardian of someone, really what those rights and responsibilities are of a guardian, which are really to help the person live as independently as possible. We may have very strong feelings about these topics, but that doesn't mean that you as a guardian get to restrict. So I love this one that Emmanuel did.
I remember very strongly when my sister first moved out, and my mother had many opinions on how my sister, should do certain things, and probably, correct opinions on what makes sense and how to, live independently and keep your apartment clean and keep things from being a chaotic mess, right? And sometimes, we're young people. Sometimes we follow our parents' advice, and sometimes we don't. But I think that people with disabilities have the same right to make dumb decisions as anybody else. And it's, Lord knows it's a right I've exercised on plenty of occasions. And particularly the messy apartment one. That's one I seem to indulge in quite a bit. It's an important part of feeling secure as an adult with a disability. Is the ability to make these choices, right? And form relationships with people. And do things and get into trouble and make mistakes. And I understand as much as I can as someone without children, I understand that parents have a lot of fears. Justifiable fears about mistakes their children will make. But I think that's true of children with and without disabilities, right? And so allowing for that freedom to grow and to learn is really, really important. Now, you have the right to forget Mother's Day tomorrow, but I really would encourage nobody to exercise that right, because you might regret it later. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that it's an important part of growing as a young person with a disability. The ability to make these mistakes is a key part of that. and make these decisions for ourselves. And go ahead, Beth. It's really, there are so many choices that a self-advocate has to make as we transition. It's about who do we include in that circle of support as a caregiver? Where do we want to work? What do we want our job to be? And our goals, and who do we want to have as friends, and who we want in our lives. And I think that no matter the person's disability, and no matter how much support they need, that support needs to be directed by the individual, right? They're the center of that universe. Now, that does not mean you ignore good advice when you hear it.
Or other trusted people.
Right, for anybody, because I think it's a balance, right? Of doing what you think is right, but also allowing for people's experience and good sense to win the day on occasion.
I know as a parent, I've had lots of times, and I'm getting better at it. It's stepping back and learning to make my adult children's dreams their reality. I talked earlier about having to be brave sometimes. And sometimes in your gut, you're like, this is really a bad idea. Really, you're going to date that girl? That's really a bad idea. But you know what? That opportunity to learn is invaluable. I'm sure many of you as parents know you can tell your kids, but until they experience it, it doesn't always stick. It's the same way growing, helping our children, our adult children with disabilities live successfully.
I remember I was talking to a friend of mine one time who has a disability, and we were talking about an issue he was having as a client of vocational rehabilitation. And he said, yeah, this is really a problem, and I don't feel like I'm going where I want to go. I said, well, you can file a complaint, you can really bring this up, and you can advocate for yourself as a client of vocational rehabilitation. And he said, well, I really like my counselor. And to me, those are two very separate things. Being a good self-advocate is going to mean sometimes disagreeing with the people at the center of your support circle. Your parents, your caregivers, the people you rely on for your day-to-day life. And I understand that takes bravery to do. But I'm a big believer that if self-advocacy takes the form of a respectful form, and it's done in a loving and collaborative way, I think it's going to yield good things. Even if it's hard. And even if it means challenging folks who are really important to us.
I just had a visual as Emmanuel was talking about that, about what I think we've tried to do for our sons. We've tried to create a safety net underneath. There's some bounce in that net. The safety net used to be pretty close. We let them bounce a little bit more now because they're making better and better choices. And we all make bad choices in our lives. And we learn from those. And if I never give them that ability to learn from those choices, they're never going to be able to live independently. Are there any questions? We have, Susan, I know, has got some things. Okay, you don't have anything else, right? You have an evaluation?
The only thing I want to tell you is, and I thank you for coming, but maybe you have more to say, is in your packets, you should have a light blue form. That's what helps us bring this session, is information that you can give us on the evaluation sheet. Please fill it out, and I will be at the door here to collect your evaluations when we're finished. Would you add some more?
Yeah, yeah.
We had a little more time. We're okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, questions?
I have a couple of questions for Emmanuel. The first one is, do you speak to kids with disabilities? I think you'd be very motivational if you...
Sorry.
In case anybody can't hear without it. I've had the opportunity to go to the Youth Leadership Forum a few times, and I don't know who's familiar with it. There's some familiar faces that I've seen there, but to me, that was one of the most impactful programs I've ever come across. Because it allows people with disabilities to meet each other and to see it's going to be okay. And that's good for parents and it's good for young people with disabilities. I go to a conference every year with people who share my disability. And I can't tell you the relief you see on parents' faces to see their young people who grew up, have a job, travel there by themselves, get in some trouble, on vacation, then go back home, right? That's a really comforting thing to see for both of us, for young people and for our support network. And that's certainly something I'd like to do more. I'm not so bully.
He's been known to blog in the past, so I just asked him if he was still blogging.
I should.
What?
I'm the Youth Leadership Forum. And it's really a great place for young people to come together and learn a lot about transition. But there's is being around people with disabilities and experiencing how comfortable that is.
If you want to find more out about the Youth Leadership program, they're out of the out of the Department of Human Rights of the state of Iowa. You can go on their website, or you can call one of the partner organizations, and we'll try to make sure that we can get you hooked into contact information for that. It's for high school juniors and seniors, and there also is a college program.
Yeah.
What?
It's actually somebody new, but I don't know who exactly. But Paige could certainly connect you with them if you have her contact.
Is it ID Action? Is that the name of the program?
They
No.
have presented there before, but I don't think they run it.
ID Action is another great way to begin to understand about voting and those things that are affecting people with disabilities in our community and our state, and that is run by the Governor's Developmental Disability Council.
So I have another question, and this is related to self-advocacy. My daughter is autistic, and she's also intellectually gifted, very bright, good vocabulary, social skills issues, and I'm teaching her to self-advocate. So as an example, she had a substitute who was not following her accommodation plan, and she came home and was so upset because she wasn't allowed to move around. And so we talked about it, and she actually talked to the principal about her issue and advocated for herself successfully and was very respectful and did a great job. So she's in third grade now. But part of
Say she was a senior.
no, she's in third grade. So she one of my concerns, I guess, is. I think she thinks autism is great, and we've embraced neurodiversity and blah blah blah. And now she's starting to hear some things like that are more derogatory. And I know you mentioned that too, that she's never thought of autism as anything other than a brain difference, because that's what we've talked about. And so I just wondered if you have any advice for a parent, like how do I prepare her for that without,
When I was growing up, I'll wait for the mic. When I was growing up, I heard all the time, FDR was a great president, even though he was in a wheelchair. And then as an adult now, I say, FDR was a great president because he was in a wheelchair, right? It gave him the tools he needed in order to have empathy, and it cultivated a lot of important things. And I think what helps me, and in those moments when I was younger, is I was taught that every moment when you encounter people with that perspective is an opportunity to go to work, right? And to help and to lovingly challenge that perspective. And again, it gets back to that embarrassment thing, right? It shouldn't be an embarrassment to your daughter. It should be an embarrassment to the people who don't know any better. And that's what we all have to do together, is lovingly say, no. You've got this backwards, and here's why. And guess what? You need us. That's the truth of it. That you need our voice, you need our perspective, and we have some amazing work to do, and we expect to get paid for it.
The person who does the Youth Leadership Forum is Lindsay Hansen. She's awesome. Yep.
I wanted to reinforce what Beth and Emmanuel said about support systems. And what I'm impressed with is the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, which really promotes the belief that individuals with autism are special, and it's very much a rights-oriented organization, talking about independence and community, but it is run by people with autism, and it's great. I know some of the people in that. The second thing I wanted to mention is our services are free. Disability Rights Iowa, we're a nonprofit agency. Most of our funds are from the federal government. And you call our intake services, and we get the basic information, and we see if we can take you on as a case or just provide you with information and referral. But we're happy to try to help to the extent we can with the resources we have.
Thank you so much for coming to listen to, I feel like Emmanuel, like we kind of talk about some of our personal journey here. Emmanuel and I have never done this presentation together before. So, she says I have 1 minute left. So thank you so much for coming. If we can be of further assistance, we do have a booth that's out there. I encourage you to look at some of the other tracks for information that is going to be presented today. And I hope that you will walk away feeling a little bit more empowered and a little braver.